Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you taking time out of your day to be here. I also want to thank Don and the board for inviting me. Before I get into the 999 plan, I wanted to say a special thanks, and I hope all of you will join me in this. I've been pretty busy over the last couple of weeks, as you can imagine. From the time I got mentioned in the debate until 2 days ago, I got about 1,000 phone calls, voicemails, text messages, Facebook comments. And since I've been working on the campaign, it's the first time in 15 years I don't have control over my schedule. So two people that are here that really are taking one for the team, putting up with my limited flexibility in my schedule, is my daughter Rachel, who's here in the front row. My other daughter couldn't stick around and she ducked out. And my girlfriend Gina. So what I'd like to do is give you an overview of the 999 plan, but then really get right to questions. I think that where this will be most interesting is if I can hear from you what your questions and issues are. In an effort to save as much time for that as we can, I'll give you kind of the broad strokes overview. First of all, I hope you like the presentation on the fair tax. That gives you a sense of directionally where we think we should be going as a country. The decision that Mr. Cain made is that the country's not ready for that right now. So one of the objectives is we need to get the economy going. We want to start by scrapping the current tax code. And we want to move in the direction of the fair tax. There are a lot of common elements. If you look at what we've done, that's one of the 9s. So we want to introduce it. We want to prove that that's actually going to help in all of the areas that the gentleman covered. It will level the playing field in trade. It will make taxes more visible. It won't increase the taxes that you pay, but it'll make it more visible, and we think that's a good thing. That's going to be the number one thing that holds the line on not allowing taxes to go up. So the question always comes up, what's going to stop 999 from becoming, 10, 10, 10 at first, and then before you know it, 20, 20, 20. It is not an efficient tax code that causes rates to go up. It's progressives. And as long as you have progressives, there'll be people that want to raise taxes as much as they can, any chance they get, by as much as they can. And it's not the tax code that's going to provide constraint to that, it's going to be you. And we think that by making it visible, all the taxes you're paying, you are all paying a lot more than you realize, and I hope I'll be able to walk through that and explain that to you. But when everybody understands more about what government really costs you, more people are going to want less government, and that's going to be the big constraint. So, if you want to scrap the tax code, Mr. Cain's objectives were, in typical executive fashion, said, I want to tax everything once and nothing twice. I want something that's simple, transparent, efficient, fair, and neutral. And if you think about how do you have to set this up in order to accomplish all that, you end up with the broadest possible base you can get and the lowest possible rate. So it's better to tax more things at a lower rate than to tax a narrow base at a high rate. The high rate is what causes all the distortion. So essentially, going through each one of the 9s, and then we'll get into the questions. The first 9 is a business flat tax. The business flat tax, well, first of all, we start by getting rid of all personal income taxes, all payroll taxes, employer and employee taxes, all corporate income taxes, the capital gains tax, and the death tax. So if you go down the list that the gentleman had up there, we're getting rid of all of them except excise taxes are more of a user fee. That's a fairly efficient tax. You only tax those that use whatever it is you're taxing. You don't tax everybody. And the last two on the list were more penalties. So if you just focus on the taxes there, it gets rid of just about all of them except the excise tax. Alternative minimum tax too is gone. So when we take those taxes out, the first 9 that we put in is a business tax that says businesses will take gross sales minus purchases from other businesses, so that's kind of your cost of goods sold, minus all capital investment, and minus net exports, which means you subtract the value of exports and you add in the value of imports. When I'm done walking you through each of the 3 nines, I want to spend a little bit of time on the trade issue, because it's one of the most important features, and all the chatter that you get about it is going to be, progressive, it's going to hurt the poor, all the stuff, the usual attack. That's one of the things that's being overlooked. That business tax base, gross sales minus purchases from other businesses, minus all capital investment, minus imports plus, minus exports plus imports, is taxed at 9%, and that's it. When you get to the middle 9, that's the personal flat tax, and that's just going to be gross income minus charitable contributions. So you won't need 80 rolls of toilet paper to figure out your taxes anymore. It's going to be a simple calculation. Unlike one of the other opponents who has an option built in, if you have a good idea, you got to stand behind a good idea and not, offer a choice. That's going to be the tax for everybody. The 9% tax is going to be on consumption. This borrows the same technique or the same concept as the fair tax. And the point I'd like to make on this is that it will not raise prices. People will try to attack the fair tax, and they will try to attack the 999, and they'll say, what about food, what about medicine, what about the poor mom who's buying milk for her kids, you're going to tax that. Well, guess what? The farmer marks up the cost of all their products by enough to cover all their costs, including all taxes. That gets passed on to the food processor, who marks up their cost to cover all of their taxes, and the same thing happens to the distributor, and by the time you buy anything in the grocery store, it's loaded with embedded taxes. So if we're going to rip out all those taxes, marginal costs are going to go down. And then we're going to put a 9% sales tax on that. So just picture a bottle of water that today costs $1. You'll see it on the shelf costing 90 cents. And then you'll pay a 9% sales tax on it. It will be about the same, because of market forces, it will be about the same cost. But we think it's a good thing that you see that 9% on there. It's a reminder that you pay more in tax than what you see out of your paycheck. The concept to keep in mind is there's a difference between the incidence of the tax and the consequence of the tax. The incidence of the tax is I'm going to tax you, and you'll see that visibly in your pay stub. But what about when you tax businesses? When you tax a business, they embed their taxes into the price of their product. It gets passed on to the next stage. It gets passed on to the next stage. And if anybody tells you you're not paying those taxes, they're not being truthful with you. Everything we buy has all those taxes embedded, and we pay the taxes whether we realize it, whether we see it or not. And what we're trying to do is move in the direction of full transparency so that you know what government really costs, and if you know what you're really paying for government, which is everything you see on your paycheck, plus the 40% of the cost of everything are embedded taxes. And if you saw that as visibly as you see your paycheck, more people are going to want less government. It's that simple. And that's going to be the constraint that we don't have now. The reason we don't have a constraint is that Washington is in the middle. They split 2 people with 2 groups, and then they hop right in the middle with the lobbyists, and they carve out all these special, deductions. If they can get you to think, oh, we're not taxing you, we're going to tax corporations. And then people go along and say, oh, okay, well, as long as you're not taxing me. Well, guess what? We're all paying those taxes. It's going to come out of your wallet one way or the other. The question is, do you want it visible the way it is on your pay stub? Don't you want your purchases to be just as visible where you have taxes listed on your sales receipt? So the first attack that the 999 plan gets is that it's going to raise prices, and it's not going to raise prices. So it can't, the sales tax can contribute to regressivity if a mom buying milk for her hungry children is going to end up paying the same. All we're doing is raising visibility. We're not raising costs, we're not raising prices. When you pull out these 5 taxes I mentioned, corporate income tax, personal income tax, all payroll tax, capital gains, and the death tax, we're pulling out about 42 percentage points of marginal cost in the production of all goods and services. And we're putting back in a combined total of 27, 9 here, 9 here, and 9 here. So you absolutely cannot reduce marginal cost by 15 percentage points and have prices go up. You know, it just doesn't work that way. Prices are going to go down. That's going to increase demand. That's going to spur output. That's going to require more capital and more labor. And that's why when we had our plan independently scored by a gentleman named Gary Robbins, who ran the econometrics function for the Department of Treasury under Ronald Reagan, he said it's the most robust plan out there. It will lead to an expansion of GDP by $2 trillion, 6 million new jobs will be created, business investment will go up by 1/3, and all this growth is going to push wages up by 10%. Let me talk about the trade for a little bit, and then I'm kind of anxious to get into your questions. Starting with the comment that the gentleman made before about the embedded taxes. We export goods that are made here in the U.S. with high embedded taxes in the cost of everything. They compete in markets around the world that largely have bad taxes, which means they don't produce the products with all the taxes embedded in the price of them because they just apply it at retail. So our goods go out, they look like they're high cost, they compete with lower cost world goods, and it is an unlevel playing field. Our own tax code unlevels the playing field against their own interests. It's absolutely nuts. And the companies that want to stay competitive so they can continue to sell you products that you want at the prices you want, so they can continue to employ people, have no choice but, in many cases, to open up a plant overseas where you can locate in a market where you don't have to embed all those costs in your products and you can be competitive. So here we are countering charges saying we're giving tax breaks to companies that ship jobs overseas. We're just saying the only way that they can manufacture products cost competitive with the world is to do it so they don't embed all those taxes. Well, under 999, what's going to happen is that exports are deductible from the business line. So they're not going to pay the business line. They will pay the middleman because whoever is doing the exporting is going to earn income, and that's going to be taxed here in the U.S. But because it's sold overseas, they're not going to pay the third line. So right now, products produced in the U.S. for export have 42 percentage points of embedded taxes in them. And now we're going to be able to produce them here and export those same goods with only 9 percentage points of embedded taxes. It will level the playing field. It will allow us to compete in any market around the world by having factories here, by having workers here, and exporting goods here. We won't have to build factories overseas. We'll be a magnet for capital from all over the world. If we could just level the playing field and have the tax code not work against our own interests, we're going to be the most attractive place in the world because it not only would be a level playing field in terms of taxes, but you have all the other benefits of locating in the U.S. As it relates to imports, imports are manufactured in countries that don't have the high embedded tax costs. They come into our market and they look like cheap imports. And they look cheap because they compete against domestic goods that have these high embedded taxes. No wonder they look cheap. Under the 999 plan, imports will come in and the first purchaser from the port will not be able to deduct that purchase. So that will be subject to the business 9%. It will be subject to the middle 9%. Whoever is making money off of the import business is going to pay personal tax here in the U.S. And because the final good is sold within the U.S., it will pick up its fair share of the 9% sales tax. So now when an import comes in, it will pay 9% $9.99, just like a domestic good will pay $9.99, and we've just leveled the playing field. So if anybody is wondering why we have a persistent trade deficit, why does it always seem like China is eating our lunch, it's because we feed China our lunch. You know, if we would just stop feeding China our lunch, we'll be able to eat anybody's lunch. The reason we have a persistently weak dollar is because we have a persistent trade deficit. So Mr. Cain is fond of saying you got to be working on the right problem. The right problem is not to go after the symptoms. The wrong problem is to go after the symptom, which is the weak dollar, and then accuse a major trading partner who is a customer, who is a supplier, and who is a lender, and accuse him of currency manipulation. You know, if we really want to solve the problem, you level the playing field on imports, which is what 999 does. You level the playing field on exports, which is what 999 does, and we'll be the destination choice for world commerce. Let me stop there, and let's get into the fun part. Sir?
Quick question. For example, a $20,000 domestic car today, what will that cost under the 999 plan?
Did everybody hear the question? The $20,000 car today, what would that cost under the 999 plan? First, let's assume it's a new car. Okay? My guess, it would cost, $18,000 at a 9% sales tax, and it will end up being about the same. I don't know if that math works out precisely, but our contention is that net bottom line out-of-pocket cost is not going to change, particularly in competitive markets. If you have a market where the government is too involved in the provision of goods and services, and you really don't have market forces to begin with, then, who's to say how that's going to fare? But that's not a problem related to 999. That's a problem
But
related to
hasn't the
government.
taxation change made a drop in cost to the manufacturer?
Right. And if the manufacturer, with costs going down, the question is, well, who's to say they're not just going to keep that profit? Well, if you think corporations are greedy, they're not going to lose market share. As soon as Mr. Cain is elected, every boardroom across the country is going to put their best people together and say, guys, if we don't figure out how to reprice our goods, we're going to lose market share. And they're going to call in all the cost accountants, and they're going to get this figured out. It's going to be spelled out. Where today, you could take the tax code that we're putting forth, and you could recalculate what your new costs are going to be, what your new taxes are going to be. And companies are going to get there because the best mandate you have for forcing them to get there are consumers. So if you're shopping around for a car that's in the $20,000 price range, and you see that somebody's figured it out, you're going to get market share. And my advice would be, if you see somebody who's trying to capture all that difference in profit, don't buy their car. And the same thing applies. So look at how all the taxes that are embedded now in cars. You have an iron ore company who marks up the cost of their product to cover all their costs, including all their taxes, that sells that to a steel company that may sell that to some intermediate step in the production. By the time you buy the car, there are tons of taxes built into it. And when you reduce marginal costs, you're not going to increase prices in competitive markets. All we're doing is increasing visibility, not costs. And the same would apply to food, same would apply to everything you buy. It already has taxes built in. This is the first step in that direction of saying, we all need to understand there's a difference between the incidence of the tax and the consequence. The incidence is we tax the iron ore company and the steel company and the processors and the auto companies, and the consequence of that tax is that it ends up costing us more at the cash register, and we just want to make that more visible. Sure.
The concern is the increase in the sales tax in the future. Is it possible to have increase in the requirement of a vote in the legislature?
Yes. The question had to do with what will stop them from increasing the sales tax. So there are constraints or there are obstacles that would just prevent it. And I would just say from an economic standpoint, the biggest obstacle is that A, everybody's going to see it. Every time you buy something, you're going to be reminded that government is costing you a lot more than what you see coming out of your paycheck. And everybody is going to pay it. So if anybody came up with an idea, hey, I got an idea, why don't we change the 9% sales tax to 10? What constituency is out there that would say, yeah, let's do it? And because everybody pays, that's the number one constraint. What the progressives are going to try to do is say, well, but yeah, if you buy funny looking light bulbs, let's reduce the rate on that and let's increase the rate. That's just, Washington. There's really nothing that would stop them. But there are groups, organizations that are calling for a constitutional amendment, whether it's part of the cut, cap, and balance legislation that one of my heroes and our fellow Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan came up with in the Republican Study Committee, that would require a 2/3 majority to raise the rate. And if something like that passed, it will protect the 999 rates, it will protect the fair tax rates, assuming that that becomes the next step. There are maneuvers that you can do with Senate rules. We have guys working on this, now. Nothing is bulletproof. It just makes it harder. And the harder you make it, the longer you can have this dialogue with the American people about, holding the line. And it's really more of a spending problem than a revenue problem. Sir?
What steps are you taking and Herman Cain taking to get the message out so that people on the left can actually understand
It's a good question.
Because, you're here doing an excellent job explaining. However, you have a lot of money, obviously, to run the campaign, but to just get the understanding of the 999 to the other side, or people that are not as educated, it just seems like an impossible task.
Well, let me make a couple comments.
Most people on the left that I've talked to, when I talk about that concept, every one of them says the corporations are going to keep the money to increase their profit margin. Obviously, they don't quite understand the concept of competitiveness and market share. But see, that's going into advanced thinking, about maybe third or fourth grade level.
Well, I think that, so far the attacks on this that it's going to raise prices isn't going to hold water. It won't hold up to scrutiny. You can't reduce marginal cost by that much and have prices go up. That's kind of, number one. And the more that we have these kind of dialogues and the more that, we have a chance to, say so through the media, that's starting to become, more accepted.
I was just saying that if the messages that you're bringing out can emphasize a little bit more how, in a more simplified as possible way, to get people in lower incomes to understand how it can actually improve their standard of living and their ability to meet their financial needs. And I really haven't seen any of that whatsoever. And how do you get that message out, and what plans do you have to do that?
Let me address that. That gets to kind of the heart of the issue of what is the impact going to be on those that are at the bottom end of the income scale. This is kind of interesting. The way we planned this rollout, we were going to do the 999 rollout first, and then we were going to do opportunity zones. And every piece of material that the campaign released that had to do with 999, under the business section, it said additional deductions for opportunity zones, and under the personal section, it said additional deductions for opportunity zones. We telegraphed that all the way, that this was going to come second. Our feeling was that you can't genuinely do anything to help the inner cities in the most distressed areas unless you get the whole country going. And you can't do anything, you can't expect that the whole country is going to have a real prosperity if you get the country going, but you leave the inner cities behind. So to us, it was that important to break it in two. I spent a lot of time volunteering down at Glenville and at the Begin Academy, helping kids understand how to get financial aid. And I'm familiar with how means-tested benefits work. And progressives think that if the government cuts somebody a check, they're helping them. But what they don't bother to do is step over and stand in that person's shoe and see what the impact is on that family as they try to then work their way up. And what we found is that the inner cities of all places have more people that face a 70% marginal tax rate than the wealthiest suburbs around. Why are we the only ones that know that? And let me give you an example how that works. If you have a single mom with 2 or 3 kids who wants to follow Herman Cain's message of empowerment and do what he did to work his way out of poverty, to do what his parents did to work their way out of poverty, as soon as the income reaches around $22,000, means-tested benefits start to get reduced. So now as you earn an additional dollar, you pay income taxes, you pay payroll taxes, and you lose part of the means-tested benefit. If you add those 3 up, it has the same punishing effect on effort as a 70% marginal rate. So you have to deal with that separately, and that's what the opportunity zones did. We carved out from the very beginning an exclusion that we call the poverty exclusion from the 999 system, so that the first announcement we made in Detroit was that 999 just made the entire country one big opportunity zone first. So for that, there is a poverty level exemption for every American that will exempt the poverty level income, whatever it is, based on your family size, so that the 999 phase starts right on top of that. So if your earnings are at the poverty level or below, you're not going to pay any tax on your business. And that only uses up 1/3 of the exclusion we have set aside. We still have a lot of powder dry where we could apply that toward the business side and provide incentives for businesses to hire lower wage, lower skilled workers. We plan to use part of that as a challenge grant, if you will, to give a geographic designation of an opportunity zone, extra tax incentives if they'll just knock down their own barriers. So we have stakeholder groups that we want to form in all of the distressed areas. We want to hear from them. What's holding you back? Is it local zoning laws? Is it this? Is it that? And if you get the business owners to say, well, here's the problem I'm having. I could expand my business and employ more people except this and this and this. They're going to make a competitive application. The zones are going to be awarded competitively. And the ones that are most serious about knocking down many of the state and local barriers, most of which are self-imposed, will still have additional exemptions that we can offer. So by exempting all Americans' income up to the poverty level, that only uses 1/3 of our exemption. Sir, back there.
Yes, I have 2 questions. The first one is, I've read where many pundits and reporters, etc., say that this is not revenue neutral, that it will decrease revenue. Of course, I disagree that we have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. But the other side of it is, compared with the current system and the 999 system under Obama's unemployment rate versus the horrible Bush year unemployment rate of like 5%, how do you see it being revenue neutral or revenue increasing, or is it going to always lag?
It's going to be revenue neutral on day one. It was designed that way from the very beginning. If you don't design a plan that is revenue neutral on day one, then you're off message selling your plan. And now you're talking about, okay, well, what are you going to cut in order to come up with it? So it was designed all along as revenue neutral, which means that if you put it in place today, the government would raise the same amount of revenue over the next year than if you left the current system in place. Now that's on a static basis. That assumes no change in behavior. So the other way to look at it is on a dynamic basis, and that's where we use Gary Robbins to do the scoring. And his assessment was ultimately, with all the growth and expansion of the economy by $2 trillion, 6 million more people working, business investment up by 1/3, wages up by 10%, ultimately federal revenues are going to be up by 15%. So the 15% extra revenues will allow us to reduce the rates further, increase the exclusion, pay down the debt. Nothing bad can happen if revenues to the government go up because of strong growth. Nothing bad can happen at that point as long as we have the discipline not to go on and spend it. Related to spending, let me just address something. The progressive rates we have are terrible for the country. To tax income here at this rate and then to keep having higher and higher rates and higher income, all it does is mathematically guarantee that in periods of economic expansion, revenues to the government increase faster than personal income. That's not a good thing. It causes, and the converse is true. During economic downturns, it means that revenues to the Treasury fall faster than personal income. So it's a built-in boom-bust cycle. And you know what happens? We've seen it firsthand. What happens when you have a boom-bust revenue cycle? In the good years, the tax burden is ratcheting up automatically on Americans, which is bad. And the extra revenue is going to get spent, which is bad, because that locks in a higher level of spending in the future years. In the first downturn you go into, revenues are going to fall faster than personal income. It's going to create a budget hole, and that's what causes the calls to increase on raising taxes. By broadening the base, by taxing it at a lower rate, by having a more efficient system, revenues are going to grow in line with GDP, on a long-term sustainable basis. So that kind of takes away one of the other, gateway drugs, if you will, to higher spending, which is this boom-bust revenue cycle. Yes?
I like the idea of simplification and elimination of the IRS and all the other things, and the fact that you can have the states do this even makes it more simple. The problem I think you have is convincing many residents, many citizens who are already paying 6, 7, perhaps 8% in sales tax, that adding another 9 to that is going to make sense. And I understand your logic that ultimately the prices come down from that. But has any thought been given to, say, a 12.96 or 12.93 percentage basis to make that a more palatable situation for voters?
Well, I think what's going to make it palatable for people is just when they understand the facts about it. It's not going to be an add-on tax. Ohio, the sales tax is, 6% or so. A bottle of water is going to cost 90 cents instead of $1. The federal government will tax it at 9%, which is going to get it back to pretty much where it started. And the sales tax is always going to be there. The federal government isn't going to be able to affect, what the states do. A big advantage of having symmetry is that it takes away the ability to game the system. If you had one rate here, and one rate here, you now are providing an incentive for people to direct their attention away from expanding output and trying to figure out how to get stuff out of here into here where it's taxed at a lower rate. So this eliminates, the so-called arbitrage, if you will, where you spend time and effort and expense trying to get something out of this bracket so that it can be taxed at this bracket, so that you can save money. So and also by having the sales tax carry an equal portion of the load, you'll pick up the underground economy, you'll pick up tourists, you'll pick up imports, you'll tax things now that just are not part of the tax base, and you end up providing the least incentive to dodge taxes.
Are all those
the least
pools,
opportunities to do so.
are all those pools equally weighted?
No, they're different in size, just based on the construction, but they all end up being roughly, let's say 9 trillion, and that's after we injected. They started a little bit over 10 each. So if you do 10 to 11, 10 to 11, we ended up with a tax base of about 33 trillion. We subtracted out about 6 for poverty exemptions. So the resulting base ends up being maybe 9. maybe under 9 trillion each. Sir?
Without the payroll taxes, how do you anticipate divvying up for Medicare, Social Security, defense?
The question is, by getting rid of payroll taxes, how are we going to fund programs such as Social Security, Medicare, et cetera? Same way we do it now. You know, we have
That's what I'm afraid of.
money that comes in, well, we have the money that comes in that goes in this non-existent trust fund. And for dollars that go in this non-existent trust fund, they're swept over to general revenues. So let's not play the shell game anymore and pretend there's a trust fund anywhere. Let's just find a more efficient way for the government to collect revenues and do it in a way that inflicts the least amount of damage on the economy, so that the pot of money that's there to pay government benefits, Social Security benefits, other spending is going to be there. We're just going to fund it in a more efficient means. How benefits are paid out is something that's totally separate. This is just a way of saying, how do you generate the requisite revenues and do it in the most simple, efficient, transparent, fair, and neutral way that you can.
So as a follow-up then, does Mr. Cain have a spending plan coming out?
We'll have a spending plan. We have some great people that are working on it now. And we'll have entitlement reform, we'll have health care, we'll have Social Security, and we'll have general spending. Here's an example on the spending. We assess a gas tax in the states. It gets sent to the federal government. They take bites out of that money like it's a corn on the cob and then send it back to the poor. Why do we even have to send it there in the first place? All that does is create a big pot of money, and then it sets up a corruption game, where if you want your fair share of that money back, you got to elect the right people, make the right campaign contributions, and go through all this just to fight to get your own money back. Yeah, we're going to say keep it in the states, totally get the federal government out of that business, and let gas taxes collected in Ohio, let Ohioans decide how to best put that money to use. Don't make us go to Washington and hire lobbyists and fight just to get more money back. Sir?
Ross Perot did a great thing with charts, and we haven't really seen this lately. I'd like to see Herman Cain, in one of these debates, just bring out a couple of charts that basically shows, here's the way it is now. You pay this tax, and this is what it is. It's kind of like a bar. Under my plan, it's this, that's the bar. Show it for like food and clothing, maybe a car, maybe an import and an export, and one other slide at the end, show some massive amount of corruption in Congress, and say under this plan it goes to that.
That's a good idea. I think you will see that. We have some presentations that we're putting together that will use some whiteboards with technology now that wasn't available when Rob
Yeah, but
wrote this.
at the debates, he could just pull up a card and show it. What's the problem here? Can you see this card? Doesn't make sense to you? Is it too simple?
You wouldn't believe how negotiated those debates are. They have lawyers, and there are no prompts or anything, but there is a calculator that's out there. It's not officially sanctioned by the campaign yet, because we're still looking into the calculations behind it. But if you Google like 999 calculator, there's somebody that basically took these concepts and said, okay, well, we've identified the embedded costs. You put in, $50 like you're going to buy something, for $50. It will tell you, here is the difference before and after. And as soon as we're done verifying all the numbers and the calculations, we may make that a campaign sanction.
But make it bar charts when you display it, because nothing is like when you can see it right in front of you.
It's a pie chart.
Yes, sir.
Rich, I know you respect you. This national tax, national sales tax, really troubles me because Denmark started out at 9%. Then they went to 10 and 12 and 15. Now they're up to 25%. And so there's nothing going to stop that from happening here. Once you get a tax, it's never going to go away. Income tax started at 2%. And we know what happened with that. And then in April of 2010, President Obama suggested a national sales tax. And the Republicans were outraged. And here we are, Republicans we're suggesting it. I think
A
it's.
couple of key differences. Obama's plan was to keep all of those taxes in place and put a dead weight sales tax on top of it.
Yeah,
No
but
matter how you
get rid
slice
of the
that.
income tax.
What's that?
You don't need to get rid of the income tax. You can manage to get it down to 9% now. You know the next administration is going to come along and put it back up again.
All right, let's have a show of hands. How many of you would vote for an increase in any of the 999 rates?
Yeah, but we're not always going to be in control, Rich. You know the Democrats will be in control someday.
It's true, but here's what we have going for us. Does anybody believe what the progressives say in the first place? When we had the income tax and they said, oh, it's going to be a penny for progress, we gave them the benefit of the doubt. We thought that that would actually help. We know better. They've been called out. We know better. We have the sleeping giant. The citizens movement is not only awake, it's on P90X last time I checked, and it doesn't seem like it's going to settle down. We're making taxes visible. And anybody that thinks
But Rich,
only
the sales
taxes...
taxes in Cuyahoga County were 5% when I grew up. Now they're over about 8%. So it's visible, but it's still going
Okay, there is no system out there. If people go back to sleep, if people disengage, if people allow progressives to get unchallengeable majorities, that's our fault. That's not the 999's fault. The 999's objective is to generate economic growth, to collect taxes simply, fairly, efficiently, neutrally, and transparently. And we have to count on each other to say, let's draw a line. Let's say that we've learned some lessons as to what the experience has been. And if we can make taxes more visible where everybody knows more about what they pay in taxes, people are simply going to want less government. And if everybody sees it and everybody pays it, that should be the best constraint that we can get, barring a constitutional amendment. I think if somebody came out and said, we should have a 2/3 constitutional amendment to keep rates from ever going up, I think Mr. Cain would be the first one to endorse it. He's already endorsed the cut, cap, and balance, which has a constitutional amendment to protect the rates. The challenge that we have, because of some of the spending reforms we're working on, I don't know that we want to get locked into an 18% of GDP. You know, if you start returning power and revenue back to the states and get rid of the unfunded mandates and allow 50 different laboratories to compete with how you're going to handle Medicaid and other things that the federal government has no business being in, there's a good chance that you can still help people to the level that they need to be helped, but do it in a way where the federal government's not eating up 18% of the economy.
Rich, these are all good, relevant questions, but we promised we'd get Rich out of here like about 8:30 because even
Rich, what do you say?
he's got his kids with him, and even though he is
Couple
one of
more
us
minutes?
rich Republicans, they gave the
Aye.
governors the night off.
One more time.
We said we get,
I have-
maybe somebody who hasn't asked.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I keep on hearing politicians say, if you cut the taxes for business, that they will create jobs. My family's been in business 53 years. Cutting taxes, if they cut my taxes, I put it in my pocket. It's demand for products and services that create jobs. Plain and simple. And as far as taxes, the premise now is that the taxes are too high. You and I both know that federal taxes, as a percentage of GDP, is at the lowest point in 50 years. In fact, Bruce Bartlett, Republican, he's impeccable Republican credentials, includes stints as policy analyst with President Ronald Reagan.
I know who Bruce Bartlett is.
Okay, recently wrote in the New York Times that the broadest measure of the tax rate, the current level, is unusually low, and it has been for some time. Yet if one listens to Republicans, one would think that taxes have never been higher, and that an excessive tax burden is the most important constraint on holding back economic growth.
Well,
The big tax cut is exactly where the economy.
Do you have a question?
Yes. Isn't it demand that's going to take us out of
No.
this?
I totally, 100% emphatically reject the premise that demand drives the economy.
Why do we have such Why do we have regular wages and nobody's buying houses?
Give me a chance to address it. Before I do so, let me just point out that production drives the economy. You have to produce in whatever your profession is first.
I have to have customers first.
No, you don't.
I'm in the service industry.
You have to serve somebody before you yourself can consume.
I have to
Okay.
serve someone. I have to have demand for my service.
Okay, there's no chicken and egg problem here. We all are both consumers and producers. We all have to produce first, provide something. I have to figure out a need that you have, and I have to figure out a way to solve it, because I can't consume unless I take care of someone else's needs first and I produce. Then and only then do I get paid. Then and only then may I consume. So production is what drives the economy. It pulls consumption along, just like the engine of a train pulls along the caboose. And the problem a lot of people have is just because the engine and the caboose travel down the tracks at the same rate, some people think the caboose actually pushes the train down the track. That's the president's problem. All of this notion that consumption drives the economy is purely to justify redistribution. If you get people to think, that the train or that the caboose pushes the train down the tracks, then there's no limit that you can go to justify putting fuel in the caboose. It just doesn't work. The problem is more than taxes. You have an overall government wedge that is not just taxes, it's regulation. And the total burden on the business sector of regulation at last count, and this doesn't include estimates for Obamacare because nobody knows what that real cost is going to be. It doesn't include Dodd-Frank because nobody knows what that cost is going to be. But estimates excluding those two massive, huge, disastrous programs are $1.8 trillion. That's almost as much as all income taxes and all personal income taxes and all corporate income taxes combined. So the problem with business now is, number one, who knows what the rules are going to be? And as long as all these regulations keep coming in, you're darn right that any cut in taxes, a businessman is going to say, I need to add that to the hunker-down war chest because I have to prepare myself to live through another disastrous economy. As soon as you reduce the size of that government wedge, as soon as you cut taxes, you're going to increase incentives. And once you get incentives to produce, that is what is going to drive income. Put it this way,
So this is not a debate.
if spending drove the economy, then that means I could tax everybody in this room by 100% and give it to somebody else and say, go spend it. And all that's doing is taking a bucket of water out of the deep end, pouring it in the shallow, and then your hope and change is that you hope the water level is going to change. It doesn't work.